The mahogany conference table gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights of Preston and Wallace Law, the kind of polish that spoke of old money and even older connections. I sat quietly at the far end, my laptop open and my evidence carefully organized, waiting for my moment. After 7 years at the firm, I knew timing was everything. "Let's wrap this up quickly," Richard Preston announced, his silver hair catching the light as he stood at the head of the table. "We have the Blackridge Industries merger to prepare for, and I won't have any distractions." I watched my colleagues, 14 of the firm's top attorneys, shuffle their papers and straighten their designer suits. 7 years of watching, learning, and gathering evidence had taught me to read them like case files. Sarah Mitchell, blonde and razor-sharp, already eyeing the junior partner position. Marcus Chen, brilliant but ruthless, who'd stolen 3 of my cases last year. And of course, James Wallace, the man who tried to bury my career more times than I could count. "Before we move on," I said, my voice quiet but clear, "I have some relevant information about the Blackridge case." The room fell silent. Not the respectful silence of attention, but the heavy silence of annoyance. I was used to it. Emily Chin, the quiet Asian American associate who'd never quite fit into their polished world of country club memberships and legacy admissions. "Emily," Wallace drawled, not bothering to hide his contempt, "we've been over this. Your research, while admirable, isn't what we need right now. This is a complex merger worth over $50 million. Leave it to those with the experience to handle it." I could feel the smirks around the table. They'd always underestimated me, seeing only what they wanted to see, the diligent worker bee, the reliable background player, the one who'd never rock the boat. "With all due respect," I continued, pulling up my files, "I've uncovered some irregularities in Blackridge's financial statements. Their reported assets don't match their." "Enough." Preston's fist hit the table, making the water glasses rattle. "This is exactly why you're still an associate after 7 years, Emily. You don't understand the bigger picture. We're not here to play detective. We're here to close a deal." I closed my laptop slowly, carefully. "Of course, my mistake." Wallace's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "This is why we keep you handling document review, Emily. You're good at the small details, but leave the real lawyering to us. Now, go back to your office and focus on those filing deadlines I gave you." As I gathered my things, Mitchell couldn't resist adding her own barb. "You know, Emily, not everyone is cut out for high-stakes corporate law. Maybe you should consider a smaller firm, or perhaps a different career altogether." I walked out of the conference room to their muffled laughter, my heels clicking against the marble floors. They thought they'd won, thought they'd put me in my place once again. But they'd forgotten the first rule of law: never underestimate your opponent. In my office, small, windowless, but perfect for my purposes, I opened my secure email and sent a single message: "It's time." The response came almost immediately: "Documents received. Meeting confirmed for tomorrow, 10 a.m. I smiled, thinking about the Blackridge Industries CEO who would be sitting in that same conference room tomorrow morning, about the evidence I carefully compiled over the past year, about the look on Wallace's face when he realized exactly what he'd dismissed. You see, while they were busy mocking my attention to detail, I'd been building a case that would shake Preston and Wallace to its foundations. Tomorrow they'd learn why the quiet ones are often the most dangerous. But let me start from the beginning. The real beginning, 7 years ago, when I first walked into Preston and Wallace Law with dreams of making partner. I remember my first day vividly, fresh out of Yale Law, top of my class, with recommendations that should have opened any door in the legal world. Preston and Wallace was the crown jewel of corporate law firms in Boston, known for handling the biggest mergers and acquisitions on the East Coast. Getting hired there was supposed to be my golden ticket. "You'll start in document review," Wallace had told me, not even looking up from his phone during my orientation. Standard procedure for new associates. That was fine. Expected, even. What wasn't expected was staying there for 2 years while my peers moved up to case management and client meetings. What wasn't expected was watching my research and analysis appear in other attorneys' presentations without credit. What wasn't expected was the systematic dismantling of every opportunity I tried to create for myself. I still remember the first time I caught one of my memos being presented as someone else's work. It was Marcus Chen, no relation thankfully, presenting my analysis of a complex securities regulation to the partners. "Brilliant work, Marcus," Preston had said, clapping him on the shoulder. "This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need." I sat in the back of the room, silent, watching Marcus bask in praise for my work. That night, I started keeping records. Every memo, every email, every piece of research I produced. Date stamped, backed up, and carefully documented. But the real turning point came 3 years ago, when I stumbled across something in the Blackridge Industries files. A discrepancy so small most people would have missed it. A pattern of transactions that didn't quite add up. Most lawyers would have passed it up the chain, eager for recognition. But I'd learned my lesson by then. Instead, I dug deeper. Nights, weekends, holidays, I built my case in secret, using the very skills they mocked me for. My attention to detail, my persistence, my ability to see patterns in mountains of data. "You need to get a life, Emily," Sarah Mitchell had said one Saturday, finding me in the office. "All this extra work won't make them respect you more." She was right about one thing. It wasn't about earning their respect anymore. It was about justice, served cold and precisely. The evidence I uncovered went far beyond mere financial irregularities. It revealed a pattern of deliberate fraud, orchestrated by some of the highest-ranking executives at Blackridge Industries. More importantly, it implicated several partners at Preston and Wallace who had helped cover it up. I took my findings to Wallace once, early on. He'd laughed it off. "This is why you'll never make partner, Emily," he'd said, sliding my carefully prepared report into his shredder without even reading it. "You don't understand how the game is played. Some stones are better left unturned." So I learned to play their game, but by my own rules. I built connections outside the firm, carefully, quietly. A network of whistleblowers, financial investigators, and most importantly, a senior prosecutor at the Securities and Exchange Commission who understood the value of patience. For the past year, I've been feeding information to the SEC, building an airtight case while the partners at Preston and Wallace grew more confident in their scheme. They thought their position was secure, their power absolute. They never wondered why I stayed, despite their constant belittlement. Never questioned why I remained so diligent in handling their worthless documents. Yesterday's dismissal of my evidence was the final piece I needed, proof that the partners had been explicitly warned of the fraud and chosen to ignore it. The recording from the conference room would make an excellent addition to the SEC's files. Now, sitting in my office after the meeting, I reviewed my preparations one last time. Tomorrow, the CEO of Blackridge Industries would arrive for what he thought was a routine merger discussion. Instead, he'd be walking into a carefully choreographed revelation of his company's crimes, with SEC investigators waiting in the wings. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a small photo. My father, standing proudly in his judge's robes. "The law is not about power," he used to tell me. "It's about justice." Tomorrow, Preston, Wallace, and everyone else who tried to bury me would learn the difference. I checked my watch, 6:00 p.m. Time to head home and prepare for tomorrow's performance. As I walked through the firm's luxurious lobby, I caught my reflection in the marble walls. Still the same quiet, unassuming Emily Chen they'd all underestimated. But tomorrow, they'd see me differently. Tomorrow, they'd learn that sometimes the most dangerous weapon in a lawyer's arsenal isn't aggression or connections, it's patience. And I had been very, very patient. The next morning, I arrived at Preston and Wallace at precisely 7:00 a.m., 3 hours before the Blackridge meeting. The early morning silence of the office felt different today, charged with possibility rather than resignation. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a charcoal gray Armani suit I'd been saving for this moment. Not my usual modest workwear, but something that spoke their language. In this world, appearance was armor, and today I needed every advantage. "You're here early," the night security guard, Mike, commented as I badged in. "Big day," I replied, smiling. Mike had been one of my few allies over the years, always noticing my late nights and weekend work. He didn't know it, but his detailed security logs of my office hours would help establish the timeline of my investigation. In my office, I began my final preparations. First, I checked my secure email, confirmation from SEC investigator Karen Martinez. Teams in position by 9:30. Evidence secured. Green light for Operation Sunrise. I smiled at the code name she'd chosen. Sunrise. The end of darkness, the beginning of exposure. How fitting. Next, I reviewed my presentation one last time. Not the sanitized version I'd shown yesterday, but the full documentation of Blackridge's fraud and Preston and Wallace's complicity. 7 years of evidence meticulously organized into a devastating narrative of corporate corruption. At 8:30, the office began filling with the usual morning bustle. I could hear the partners arriving, their voices confident, laughing about dinner reservations and golf scores. They had no idea their world was about to shatter. Sarah Mitchell stopped by my office at 9:15, her smile dripping with false sympathy. "Emily, don't bother coming to the Blackridge meeting. Mr. Preston wants to keep it partners only." "Of course," I replied mildly. "I'll just finish up these filing deadlines." She left, satisfied that she'd put me in my place one last time. I waited until her clicking heels faded before sending a text to Karen. They took the bait. Everything's set. At 9:45, I gathered my materials and headed to the small conference room adjacent to the main boardroom. Through the glass wall, I could see the partners assembling, arranging their papers, adjusting their power poses. James Wallace was holding court at the head of the table, probably rehearsing how he closed the biggest merger of his career. At 9:55, my phone buzzed. A text from the lobby security desk. "Blackridge CEO and SEC teams have arrived. Showtime." I watched through the glass as Charles Blackridge II entered the boardroom, flanked by his CFO and legal team. Right behind them came Karen Martinez and 4 other SEC investigators, their badges gleaming. "What's the meaning of this?" Preston demanded, half rising from his chair. "Please, everyone remain seated," Karen announced, her voice carrying the full authority of the federal government. "We're here to discuss some concerning findings regarding the proposed merger." "This is outrageous," Wallace sputtered. "Who authorized?" "I did," I said, walking into the room. The silence that followed was absolute. I could see the confusion on their faces. What was the quiet associate doing here? Why was she standing shoulder to shoulder with SEC investigators? "Emily," Preston started, his tone a mixture of confusion and warning. "This is a private meeting. You need to." "Actually," Karen cut in, "Ms. Chen is central to this investigation. She's been working with us for the past year, documenting extensive securities fraud at Blackridge Industries and this firm's role in concealing it." The color drained from Wallace's face as I connected my laptop to the room's display system. "Perhaps we should start with the offshore accounts," I suggested calmly, pulling up the first set of documents. "The ones Mr. Wallace helped structure in 2019. What followed was 2 hours of methodical destruction. I presented evidence of falsified financial statements, illegal stock manipulations, and systematic fraud, all documented through years of careful observation and investigation. With each revelation, I watched the mighty partners of Preston and Wallace crumble. These transactions, I explained, highlighting a particularly damning series of documents, were flagged in our internal review last year. When I brought them to Mr. Wallace's attention, he ordered them buried. Fortunately, I kept excellent records. I played the recording from yesterday's meeting, their dismissal of my evidence now damning proof of their willful ignorance. Charles Blackridge II, who had started the meeting looking imperious and bored, now sat ashen-faced as his empire unraveled. His CFO had already started whispering with his lawyers, no doubt planning his plea deal. "This is a mistake." Wallace tried one last time, his voice shaking. "Emily is just a junior associate who graduated top of her class from Yale Law," Karen interrupted, "who spent 7 years building an airtight case while you were too busy underestimating her to notice. Ms. Chen has provided us with the most comprehensive corporate fraud investigation I've seen in 20 years at the SEC." I kept my face neutral, but inside, I savored every word. 7 years of dismissal and disrespect, washed away in a single morning of truth. By noon, the SEC had served subpoenas to half the partner table. Charles Blackridge II was being escorted out by federal agents, and I stood in the middle of it all, finally seen for who I really was. "Why?" Sarah Mitchell asked as she was packing up her office later that day, her career in shambles. "Why stay here all these years if you knew?" I thought about all the nights I'd worked alone in my tiny office, all the times they'd laughed at my dedication to detail. "Because justice isn't just about finding the truth," I told her. "It's about proving it beyond any doubt." The aftermath was seismic. Preston and Wallace, once the crown jewel of Boston's legal scene, was now facing its own legal battles. Half the partner table was under indictment. The other half were desperately trying to distance themselves from the scandal. 3 months later, I sat in a different conference room, this time at the Justice Department. "The Attorney General is very impressed with your work," Karen told me, sliding an offer letter across the table. "We need more lawyers like you, ones who understand that true justice requires patience and precision." I looked at the letter, a senior position in the department's corporate fraud division. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same skills Preston and Wallace had mocked would now be my greatest assets. But before I accepted, I had one last piece of business to attend to. I visited my father, bringing with me a newspaper featuring the Blackridge scandal on its front page. "You were right, Dad," I told him, placing the paper on his desk. "The law isn't about power. It's about justice." He smiled, pride shining in his eyes. And sometimes he added, "Justice comes from the most unexpected places." Looking back now, 5 years later, from my office at the Justice Department, I can't help but smile at how it all played out. Preston and Wallace never recovered from the scandal. James Wallace was disbarred. Richard Preston retired in disgrace. The Blackridge fraud became a case study in law schools, including Yale, where I now guest lecture on corporate ethics. But the real lesson wasn't about fraud or justice, or even revenge. It was about patience, about the quiet strength it takes to stand firm in the face of dismissal and derision. About knowing that sometimes the best way to fight isn't with loud declarations, but with careful documentation and unwavering persistence. Sarah Mitchell runs a small practice now, focusing on pro bono work, a complete transformation from her former self. She sent me a letter last year, apologizing for her past behavior and thanking me for the wake-up call. "You taught me that true legal excellence isn't about power or prestige," she wrote. "It's about standing up for what's right, no matter how long it takes." As for me, I still keep that photo of my father in his judge's robes on my desk. But next to it now sits a framed quote that I see every morning. "Justice is not a sprint, but a marathon." It reminds me that sometimes the quietest warriors are the most effective, and that true victory isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. The young lawyers who work with me now often ask how I managed to stay focused during those 7 years at Preston and Wallace. My answer is always the same. Success isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about being the most prepared. And sometimes, preparation means waiting for exactly the right moment to show your hand. Looking out my office window at the Washington skyline, I think about all the other quiet warriors out there, gathering their evidence, building their cases, waiting for their moment. To them, I want to say, keep watching, keep documenting, keep believing. Because sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is proving everyone wrong, not with words, but with undeniable truth. And in the end, truth has a way of speaking for itself. You just have to be patient enough to let it.